It happened at 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. The entire floor had been summoned to the Strategy Suite glass walls, polished concrete, and Lorna Greaves at the center like a judge presiding over sentencing. I knew what was coming. She had asked me to project my engagement files as part of our quarterly performance demonstration. Her tone was falsely polite, her smile brittle. Everyone thought it was another showcase of results. I knew better. My cursor hovered over the folder. I opened it. Slide after slide appeared client timelines, conversation touchpoints, tracked patterns of loyalty. I had spent 12 months designing it, a human-centered web of relationships that quietly elevated our retention rates by over 30%. Not just numbers, lives, voices, decisions. I had treated our clients like people, not transactions. Lorna let it play for 23 seconds before she raised a manicured hand. This, she said, turning to the room, is what happens when we prioritize small talk over performance. She walked toward the screen heels, clicking, and tapped the delete button as if she were performing an exorcism. "Trash!" she hissed. The file vanished. The silence was full and hard. No one met my eyes. Not the interns, not Janeth, not Gideon, who watched from the back pretending his phone needed checking. I didn't move, didn't argue. I just closed the laptop, placed my hands calmly on the table, and breathed in the clinical scent of too much air conditioning. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Chicago area code. I stood, excused myself without apology, and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked softly behind me. Ms. Strix, a calm voice, greeted me. "Caspian Durrell here from Marlowe Partners. We've been watching your work at Cortinex. We're prepared to offer you $500,000 annually with equity and full design autonomy. We'd like to know if you're ready to build something that actually honors what you do." I looked through the glass at Lorna, still monologuing back, turned arms spread like she owned the oxygen in the room. "I'm listening," I said. Because the file Lorna had deleted was never the real one, and I'd always known this moment would come. 3 years earlier, Cortinex had been bleeding clients so fast they stopped publishing internal retention reports. Every Monday meeting started with a new account lost. Leadership blamed everything except themselves, pricing the market, even emotional fatigue. But no one looked at how the company treated its clients. When I arrived, they called me overqualified. Too seasoned, someone whispered. That was their way of asking why I'd left a larger firm for a struggling one. I didn't explain. I needed a quieter place to work, somewhere they wouldn't see me coming. At first, I followed the protocol. 15-minute check-ins, templated follow-up emails, the dreaded CRM interface that logged everything except meaning. But I could see the cracks, clients pulling away mid-contract frustration, simmering beneath their formal replies. What they wanted wasn't another email, they wanted to be remembered. So I started keeping a second file off the record mine alone. I tracked their birthdays, their kids' names, the day their voice cracked during a call. I remembered when Ravi's wife had surgery, when Alma's dog died, when Mitchell landed that book deal he hadn't told anyone about. I didn't send gifts or flowers. I just followed up weeks later and asked, "How did it go?" every time they paused. "You remembered that?" Of course I did, because relationships are stories. And I don't forget a good story. I didn't talk about this to anyone, especially not to Lorna. But Janeth noticed. She sat near me and once said, "You make them feel seen." She said it like a compliment. I believed her. We would chat sometimes, safe surface level. She laughed at Lorna's rants, rolled her eyes during tense reviews. I thought she was harmless. What I didn't know was that every time she leaned over to admire my color-coded notes or asked casually how I tracked renewals, she passed it upward. Quietly, efficiently, like she was part of something bigger. She was. I didn't realize just how deep her loyalty to Lorna ran until the day I found her name buried in the access log of a file I'd never shared. Lorna hated ambiguity. If it didn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet, it didn't exist. And if it couldn't be translated into a quarterly KPI, it was a distraction. She'd skim my weekly logs, eyes twitching at my longer call duration, side comments scribbled in the margins like dog's surgery went well or daughter's piano recital next month. To her, these weren't relationship notes. They were inefficiencies. One Thursday morning, after a client renewed a contract 3 months early and doubled their service package, I walked into her office with a thick folder in hand. 53 pages, correlated metrics, revenue spikes, referrals linked directly to personalized interactions. It was evidence, hard measurable evidence that my approach was working. She flipped through 3 pages, then closed it. Strix. She said, not looking up. We're not in the business of pen pal friendships. This isn't therapy. It's consulting. I remember staring at her hands as they rested on the report, motionless, almost like she was afraid touching it too long would legitimize it. I'm not asking to change protocol, I replied evenly. I'm asking that we acknowledge the actual outcomes. She handed the file back. We acknowledge what's repeatable at scale, not sentiment. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn her approval. Not out of anger, just clarity. I saw then that we weren't speaking the same language. She wanted velocity. I wanted longevity. She was chasing conversion. I was building connection. From that point forward, I began tracking more than just clients. I started logging internal behavior, who accessed what files, when, and for how long. Cortinex's system left fingerprints on everything. Most didn't notice, but I wasn't most. I found Janeth's name in file histories where it didn't belong. Lorna's too. They hadn't just dismissed my methods. They were watching them copying pieces, trying to replicate results without crediting the approach. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I kept doing my work, kept sending check-ins, kept listening. Until the day Lorna handed me a new assignment with a smirk. We'll need you to audit all your relationship-building activities for the past year. The audit came wrapped in politeness and printed on company letterhead. Just a standard performance review, Lorna said, handing me the directive with the flat affect of someone who's already decided how it ends. We want to better understand how your client interactions align with our long-term efficiency benchmarks. The document listed 14 categories, each more vague than the last communication frequency engagement tone, non-standard activities. It wasn't a review. It was a trap built out of bureaucracy, designed to exhaust, confuse, and ultimately discredit. I smiled and nodded, then I got to work. For the next 6 weeks, I treated the audit like a thesis. I pulled transcripts, call logs, feedback threads. I built interactive dashboards cross-referencing sentiment shifts against renewal cycles. I overlaid referral spikes with follow-up patterns and attached anonymized client voicemails, their words, not mine, describing how someone finally listened. I didn't just show that my approach worked. I proved that without it, we were losing nearly $500,000 a year. But I knew better than to upload the real version into Cortinex's shared system. That one stayed offline encrypted, backed up 3 times. The version I submitted was a streamlined decoy, real enough to meet the audit requirements, but missing the spine. No data trails, no embedded metadata. Just enough. And yet even the decoy was damning in its own way. The more I compiled, the clearer it became. Cortinex had no idea why its clients stayed or why they left. They didn't measure trust. They didn't value memory. They were blind to the very thing that kept the revenue graph stable. By the time I handed the report to Lorna, she'd already stopped calling it a review and started calling it a learning tool. She couldn't quite hide the unease in her voice, and I could feel Janeth watching me again too, casually too often. The trap had been set for me. But the moment Lorna scheduled a team-wide strategy showcase built around my audit, I knew exactly who had just stepped into it. They called it a strategy showcase. No agenda, no warning. Just a calendar invite from Lorna with the subject line, Client Retention Lessons from Within. The room was already full when I arrived, Janeth pretending to scribble notes, Gideon sitting stiff in the back row, lips pressed into nothing. Lorna stood at the head of the table, smiling like she owned the oxygen in the room. "Aurelia," she said smoothly, Why don't you walk us through your audit? The team deserves to learn from your unique process." Her tone was light, but her eyes were anything but. This wasn't recognition. It was theater. I knew the script. She wanted to destroy me publicly under the pretense of analysis. I opened the decoy file. Slide 1, client engagement overview. Slide 2, sentiment chart overlays. Slide 3, selected follow-up transcripts. She let me speak for barely 2 minutes before she interrupted. "Let's pause here," she said, stepping toward the screen. She clicked through the next 10 slides herself, her commentary growing sharper. This unquantifiable fluff. Here, emotional detours. And this one remembered his dog's surgery. Really Strix people stopped taking notes. Some looked down. A few glanced at me quick and uncomfortable. Janeth didn't look at anything. This Lorna said hovering over the final page is precisely the kind of inefficiency that makes us vulnerable. Then she clicked delete. No confirmation prompt. No second thoughts. The file disappeared from the shared system, and with it a year of what they assumed was my entire body of work. I kept my hands still, my breath even, because what Lorna had just erased was a decoy, a curated diluted shell meant to bait her into doing exactly what she'd done. The real audit, encrypted and complete, was never on their server. Lorna turned away, proud of herself, already moving on. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't shocked. I was focused. Because as the room stared at me in stunned silence, my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket for the second time that day. I stepped into the hallway, the weight of 23 eyes still lingering behind me. The door closed with a hush, and I answered the call without hesitation. "Aurelia," the voice said. "It's Caspian Durrell, Marlowe Partners." I leaned against the cool glass wall and let him speak. "We've followed your work since before you knew we existed. We left Cortinex because we believed in relationships over metrics. And frankly, your approach proved we were right. He didn't waste time. We're offering you $500,000 annually, full equity share and complete autonomy over client systems. No hierarchy, no gatekeepers. You'll build what you believe in, and we'll protect it." His voice was calm, factual, not a pitch, an invitation. I didn't hesitate out of doubt. I hesitated because I wanted something more than escape. I wanted the moment to ripen. "I need 48 hours, I said. There was a pause. Negotiation observation. Another pause. Then soft laughter. Understood. What Caspian didn't know, what no one at Marlowe knew, was that I'd already mapped the defection paths 6 months earlier. I had quietly built a database client sentiment shifts, tolerance thresholds, decision arcs. I knew which clients would leave Cortinex and, more importantly, why. The report had been anonymized and left dormant until today. Marlowe had unknowingly built their predictive retention engine on top of the very insights I'd created, buried in the blind spots Cortinex refused to see. And now, the two systems were about to collide. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and stood still for a moment. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt precise. Everything was moving exactly as it should. When I walked back into the conference room, Lorna was still speaking something about tightening protocols and centralizing language. Janeth sat with her eyes fixed on the screensaver behind her. I took my seat again, calm as glass, and waited for her to turn toward me. Because when she did, I would be ready to tell her everything she never saw coming. The next morning's meeting was scheduled as Operational Reset, Client Strategy Alignment. The title alone told me everything Lorna was trying to reframe the fallout, to control the story before it started controlling her. I arrived early. Not out of deference, out of intent. The room filled slowly. People carried coffees like shields. Janeth wouldn't look at me. Gideon entered last, as usual, taking his seat like a ghost hovering in a collapsing house. Lorna began with a light tone. "We've had some lively internal debate," she said. "And while not all strategies survive in a scalable model, the goal now is cohesion." She turned toward me expectant. Aurelia, would you like to say something before we move forward? I stood. No papers. No clicker. Just my phone. I'm resigning, effective immediately, I said. The air changed. I tapped my screen and mirrored it to the conference display. The room filled with a digital contract, my new position at Marlowe Partners, full salary breakdown, equity confirmation entitled Director of Strategic Engagement Systems, gasps, movement. Lorna's lips parted, but no sound came. Then I swiped again. Since we're discussing cohesion, I said I'd like to share evidence of coordinated internal breaches involving confidential work. On screen, access logs, time-stamped entries, user activity, Janeth's name appearing over and over. Beneath hers, Lorna's. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Gideon leaned forward, knuckles pressed to his lips. You didn't just delete a file, I said quietly. You deleted the future of the one thing this company still did right. Lorna opened her mouth, but no words followed. Janeth looked like she might cry. I had no energy for her tears. I stopped the screen share, gathered my folder, my bag, my breath. I'll have my formal resignation in HR before noon. I left before anyone responded, left the room, the floor, the building. And when the door clicked shut behind me, I didn't look back, because I already knew what was coming next. It didn't take long. Within the first week at Marlowe, I received 3 calls from former clients. Not one of them mentioned Lorna by name. They didn't have to. The tone said, enough, careful, cautious, disappointed, like someone stepping out of a room that no longer felt safe. By the second week, 7 major accounts had initiated formal transitions to Marlowe. They came with quiet emails and purposeful questions about scope, about timeline, about whether I'd still be the one they spoke to directly. I said yes. That was all they needed. 3 of my old teammates left Cortinex soon after. One sent a single-line message, if there's space, I'm in. I didn't hesitate. I knew who had watched and understood without saying a word. Back at Cortinex, Lorna tried to adapt. Word filtered through the grapevine new relational touchpoint scripts, internal training on empathetic tone, a mandatory series called Client Warmth Fundamentals. I could have laughed if it weren't so tragic. You can't teach sincerity to someone who still believes caring is inefficient. Then came the email leak. Someone forwarded it anonymously to a journalist at Tech Brief Midwest. It was real, unfiltered internal. Lorna had written it just 2 days after I resigned. In it, she referred to our largest clients as emotional liabilities and needy time wasters. She called personalized consulting the slow death of profitability and described my exit as removing the anchor so the ship can finally speed up. The article went live on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, 2 more clients pulled out. By Friday, the board at Cortinex released a statement promising an urgent internal review of leadership communications. I didn't need to issue any response. Marlowe's inbox overflowed with inquiries, new prospects, former skeptics, old contacts who had ghosted me when I was still at Cortinex now wanted to reconnect over coffee. I smiled politely, but I wasn't keeping score. Because it was never about revenge. It was about truth finding its own voice long after everyone had stopped listening. By the 3rd week, the silence from Cortinex was louder than any announcement. Their social channels went dormant. Recruiters stopped mentioning their name, and former clients started forwarding generic check-in emails from junior staff, trying and failing to sound personal. Then came the headline, Cortinex loses 40% of revenue in Q1 drop. The board launched an investigation, not a surface one deep forensic. They began reviewing internal correspondence client loss patterns, renewal trends. And somewhere in that excavation, someone found a file. It wasn't labeled dramatically, just a clean PDF, time-stamped, cross-referenced. It was my real audit, the full version, the one I had encrypted and later sent anonymously to Cortinex's largest investor after I resigned. Not as revenge, as warning. It detailed in quiet, data-backed precision exactly what would happen if the company continued to treat relationships as inefficiencies. I had built models forecasting retention decay, projected defections by tier, and tagged every account that was likely to leave in the absence of personalized continuity. It wasn't personal, it was inevitable. They didn't know where it had come from, but they knew who had written it. Gideon called me the following Monday. His voice was steadier than I expected. "I read it," he said. "I read all of it. I didn't say anything. We made a mistake." Now I said something. "No," I replied. "You made a decision. A mistake is a stumble. What happened at Cortinex was deliberate." He tried again, asked if I would consider returning as Director of Client Strategy, reporting directly to the board. Full autonomy, name your price. I declined before he finished. There are things you walk away from, and there are things you outgrow so completely. Stepping back inside feels like shrinking. Lorna was let go without announcement. No email, no farewell message. Her office was cleared out by the end of the week. Janeth disappeared shortly after. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because the numbers said it better than I ever could. And by the time the board formally offered to buy Marlowe's client systems in exchange for what they called strategic alignment, I already knew exactly how I'd respond. 6 months later, I stood beneath the soft lights of a downtown conference hall, looking out at a room filled with more than 500 leaders, analysts, and executives. The screen behind me read, "Empathy is data." They leaned in as I spoke, not because I was loud, but because the story had already reached them before I ever opened my mouth. I told them about listening for what clients never said out loud, about tracking context, not just content, about the moment a small check-in became the reason someone signed a $1 million renewal. I never mentioned Cortinex by name. I didn't need to. By now, the industry knew the pattern, the fall, the fracture. Afterward, people lined up to talk. Some shook my hand with purpose. Others thanked me quietly like I had said something they hadn't known they needed to hear. Later that evening, I returned to my office at Marlowe. It was smaller than the corner glass box I once sat in, but it pulsed with something far more valuable: trust. Freedom, forward motion. A promotion had come last month, managing partner unanimously voted by the founding team. Caspian had handed me the letter with a smile and said, "You were never the client whisperer. You were the architect." And I was. Not just of retention systems, but of something bigger, an ethic of attention. A culture where people mattered more than dashboards. Where being remembered became the competitive edge. The email from Janeth came late, a short message folded in apology. "I made the wrong bet. I see that now. I'd like to talk if you're open." I read it once, closed it, never replied. Not out of spite, just clarity. Some people confuse forgiveness with reinstatement, but growth doesn't always circle back. Sometimes it moves forward without a sound. I turned off the lights, walked through the quiet office, and paused for a moment at the window. The city below glowed soft and full of momentum. I'd spent years trying to prove I belonged inside someone else's system. Now I was building the one they couldn't survive without. Some things you rebuild, some things you outgrow.